The night they arrested me, I thought it had to be a mistake. Fraud? Wire transfers? Accounts I'd never even touched? I was the steady one, the boring one. I paid bills on time, filed taxes early, kept my head down at work. Yet there I was, cuffed on my own front porch, neighbors watching, accused of moving money through shell accounts that I hadn't even heard of until the detective showed me the paperwork. My brother, Mason, was the wild one, charming, reckless, always skating just ahead of trouble. I'd covered for him before, small things, unpaid tickets, borrowing my ID to get into a bar, a credit card mix-up. But this time, the stakes were life-altering. He had used my name, my credentials, my reputation to build his empire of lies. And when the law came knocking, it wasn't Mason they dragged away, it was me. My name is Reed Mallory. I'm 31, male, and I work as an accounts receivable specialist at a mid-size industrial supplier called Garner & Latch. My days are invoices, remittance files, ACH batches, and reconciling pennies that most people would let drift into the cracks. I keep folders named by date. I color code promises. I like clean ledgers because they don't argue. At 11:52 p.m. on a rainy Thursday in April, I was brushing my teeth when the doorbell rang 3 times in a row, short, long. By the third chime I already knew it wasn't a neighbor. I wiped my mouth, pulled on a hoodie, and opened the door to 2 detectives under the eave, water beading on their jackets. Behind them, a third officer stood by a gray sedan with its engine idling. "Reed Mallory?" the taller one asked, voice steady, like he'd asked it 100 times. "Yes." "Detective L. Haynes, Easton City Financial Crimes," he said, showing a badge and a folded document. "This is Detective B. Cordero. We have a warrant for your arrest for fraud, identity theft, and possession of instruments of crime." He held the paper where I could see the header, Easton County Court, Warrant No. 24 to 3178 FC, signed, rubber stamped, my name printed in block letters. "We also have a search warrant for electronic devices on the premises." I felt my heartbeat move from my chest to my hands. "That's a mistake," I said, because it had to be. "I haven't, what fraud?" Haynes read from a page with the flat cadence of someone reading a weather report. "Multiple ACH and wire transfers initiated from accounts in your name to limited liability entities suspected to be shells. Structured deposits below the $10,000 threshold. A vehicle purchase using a line of credit open with your credentials. We'll go over it at the station." Behind him, the rain hissed in the gutters. My porch light flickered, then held. Cordero's tone softened a notch. "Sir, I need you to turn around, place your hands behind your back." She produced black nitrile gloves from a pocket and slid them on, the snap of the cuff tiny and final. I put my hands back. The cuffs were colder than I expected. They read me my rights. I said I understood and that I wanted a lawyer before any questioning. It sounded like a script, and I suppose it was, but the words steadied my breath. "Anyone else inside?" Haynes asked. "No. Just me." "Do you consent to us securing the premises for the search?" he said, holding up the second warrant, 24 3179 SW, listing electronic devices, storage media, financial documents, mail. "It's your warrant," I said. "You don't need my consent." He nodded once, professional, and gestured. An evidence tech in a gray polo came up the walk carrying a hard-sided case. "We'll inventory what we take," Haynes said. "You'll get a property receipt." They walked me to the sedan. The back door opened with a thunk. I slid in, head ducked, cuffs biting my wrists. Through the rain-smeared window I watched the tech step into my living room. He paused to photograph the room, then headed straight for the desk where my laptop waited next to a tidy stack of mail. The door closed and the outside blurred. The ride downtown took 9 minutes, according to the digital clock on the dash. 9 minutes in which I tried to line up anything in my life with the list Haynes had recited. ACH and wires? I processed them at work, sure. In my name? No. Shell companies? I could barely keep a cactus alive, I wasn't out here registering LLCs. Structured deposits under 10 grand? I knew what that meant because we flagged them in vendor payments, structuring to avoid a center I had never deposited more than my paycheck and the odd Venmo reimbursement. At 12:09 a.m. I was let into intake. Fluorescent light flattened everything, faces, time. They took my belt and shoelaces, logged my hoodie as item 01, property, and gave me a plastic bin with a number, ECDF 71462. I repeated in my head to keep the rest from spilling out. They rolled ink on my fingers, pressed them to cards, scanned my palms on a glass plate that hummed in a way that made fillings itch. A nurse checked my blood pressure and asked if I'd taken any medication. I said melatonin at 10:30, which made her smile like I'd told a joke. They put me in a holding cell that smelled like disinfectant and tired. The bench was bolted steel. I sat and counted ceiling tiles. At some point, a public defender on duty, Ms. Trenholm, appeared at the bars, brown hair clipped back, a yellow legal pad already scribbled with my name. Read? I'm with the county PD's office. I've got 10 minutes before arraignments start stacking up. Tell me nothing about the facts beyond what you've already told the police, which I hope is nothing. Are you okay? I'm okay, I lied. They said fraud. ACH and wires. Accounts in my name. I didn't do any of that. Good. Keep that sentence in your pocket until you're in front of a judge. She slid a business card through the bars. They'll probably cite you on the local charges and kick the rest up to the AG or federal if it's big enough. We'll push for roar or a low bond. Any priors? No. Stable job? Local residence? Yes, I said. Garner and Latch, 3 years. I rent on Wilder Avenue. She wrote fast. Anyone I should call? My mouth opened before I knew what I was going to say. My mom, I started, then stopped. The second name arrived uninvited. And, my brother, Mason. The muscle in her jaw flexed, reading something in my face. Is he helpful? He's family, I said, which was not an answer. They brought me to an interview room at 12:48 a.m. Haynes and Cordero sat opposite, a small black recorder on the table with a red light that was either on or burning. My cuffs were clipped to a ring bolted into the tabletop. Ms. Trenholm sat to my left, pen ready. For the record, Haynes said to the air, subject has asked for counsel. We are not questioning him about the alleged crimes. He slid a thin packet across to me. The top page was a photocopy of a Summit Bank statement. My name was printed at the top with an address I recognized, my own. Below it, a checking account ending in -$1,832 I did not recognize. The statement showed 4 incoming wire credits over 2 weeks, $7,480, $7,480, $7,480, $7,480. The memo lines were all some version of invoice settlement. Do you maintain an account at Summit Bank? Haynes asked Ms. Trenholm, carefully phrasing it to a wall. She shook her head. We'll note your refusal. He flipped to the next page. An application for a bail-in credit union line of credit, approved for $18,500, with my employer listed accurately, my salary about right, my driver's license number correct down to the last digit. The signature at the bottom looked like mine, the way my name looked when I signed hurried forms in waiting rooms. I felt something cold slide behind my ribs. That's not, I started. Trenholm touched my wrist under the table. I stopped. Haynes continued like I hadn't made a sound. We also have dealership paperwork for a 2018 graphite gray sedan purchased in cash equivalent cashier's checks drawn on the Summit account. The buyer of record is you. The plate traces to an address on Fenwick Street, not yours. He placed a color copy of the registration on the pile. My name again. A Fenwick address I didn't know. Ms. Trenholm spoke for the first time. Detective, my client will not be making a statement. If you have further paperwork, you can disclose it through discovery. Haynes nodded. Understood. We'll do arraignment at 9 a.m. They took me back to the cell. I leaned my head against the cool cinder block and did what I always do when the ground gives way. I started a log in my head. 011, warrant served. 032, property logged. ECDF 71,462. 048, interview room. Summit Bank statement with 4 wires at 7,480. Bail-in CU lock 18,500. DL hash correct. Signature looks like mine, but the loop on the R is wrong. Note, Meyer always hooks twice. This one hooks once. Fenwick Street, memorize, 1,426? 1,428? The copy was skewed. I thought it read 1,428. I tried to run the ledger, what I knew, what I could prove, what someone else had slipped in while I wasn't looking. My life, in numbers, has always balanced. The only person close enough to borrow the details needed to unbalance it was the one I'd never admit out loud, Mason. 2 years older, louder, magnetic in ways that made waiters remember his name and landlords forget late fees. As kids, I'd cover his library fines with allowance because he could make anything sound like an accident. At 19 he borrowed my ID to get into a bar for one night, and it went missing for 3 days. At 25, A credit card mix-up put a couriered replacement in his hands before mine because he was closer to the distribution center. The story always had enough true pieces to carry itself across the gap. At 2:17 a.m., a trustee slid a sandwich and a paper cup of water through the slot. I wasn't hungry, but I ate because my hands needed something to do. When the trustee came back to collect the trash, he looked at my wristband and said, "Financial crimes. Rough." Then he added, like a man giving weather advice, "Keep your paperwork." I slept in slices until 7:41 a.m., when they lined us up for arraignment. The courtroom was small, wood-paneled, the flag to the left of a woman in black robes who could end my week with a stamp. The charges were read. My name sounded like it belonged to someone else. Ms. Trenholm argued for release on recognizance, no priors, stable employment, strong community ties. Haynes, seated behind the prosecution table, didn't object. The judge set a court date, warned me not to contact any witnesses or co-defendants, and told me to surrender my passport by the end of the day. As I was signing the recognizance form, Haynes stepped close enough that I could see the rain still drying on his jacket. "Off the record," he said softly, "if this isn't you, someone close had a lot of your data. Start thinking about who would know your DL hash, employer, salary, and have a sample of your signature." The pen paused over the line where I was supposed to write my name. Meyer hooked twice, the way it had since Mrs. Culver taught cursive in 3rd grade. "I am," I said. On my way out, the property clerk handed me a receipt for seized items, ECFC 2189 at the top. Item 02, Apple MacBook Pro SNCO2W. Item 03, Samsung Galaxy S21 EMA. Item 04, 2 USB flash drives. Each line had a barcode sticker and a chain of custody signature. My life in a list, bagged and initialed. Outside, the rain had stopped, and Wilder Avenue smelled like wet asphalt and lilacs. I walked home without a phone, without a laptop, without the quiet certainty I'd built my days on. On the kitchen table, I laid out the only thing they hadn't taken, a spiral notebook from the junk drawer. On the first page I wrote, in block letters, "Case log, State v. Reed Mallory." Under it, I wrote the 3 questions that would run my life until I could answer them with timestamps and exhibits. 1. Who opened the Summit account in my name? 2. How did they get my DL hash, salary, and signature sample? 3. Where does Fenwick Street lead? I put the notebook down and stared at the spot on the table where my laptop had been. Mason's face surfaced in my mind the way oil blooms through water, slick, beautiful, impossible to ignore. He was the only person who had ever handled my wallet without asking. The only one who knew enough to imitate the loops of my R. The doorbell didn't ring this time. My phone didn't buzz. The silence had a hum to it, like a server room after the lights go off. I picked up a pen, wrote 822, call mom. Do not call Mason. Then I underlined the second sentence twice. I've spent my career keeping other people's ledgers honest. Now I had to unspool my own, line items I never authorized, entries someone else made in my name. It wasn't going to be a conversation. It was going to be an audit. And audits, done right, end in numbers that don't let anybody lie. Mason and I were only 2 years apart, but sometimes it felt like decades. He was the older brother, born with a smile that could talk cops out of tickets and teachers out of detentions. I was the quieter one, the ledger keeper, the kid who actually returned library books on time. When we were young, I thought Mason was magic. He could climb the tallest tree, sneak into movies, charm candy out of the corner store clerk. But magic came with a cost. When the candy went missing and the clerk threatened to call our mom, it was me who confessed and paid out of my allowance. When Mason borrowed my bike and left it unlocked, I was the one who mowed lawns all summer to replace it. At 16, he borrowed my driver's license. Just for one night, he swore. I didn't see it again until 3 days later, after he'd used it to talk his way into a bar. My name was scratched on some list, flagged at the door, and I spent the next month explaining to people that I wasn't the one who'd puked in the alley behind Donovan's. Mason laughed it off, slapped me on the back. Lighten up, Reed. You're too serious. At 25, I got a credit card mix-up in the mail. My replacement card arrived already activated. The first charge? A jewelry store in another county. Mason called the next day. Oh, that was me. Thought it was my card. I'll pay you back. He didn't. I ate the charge to protect his credit, because by then he'd convinced our mom that he was finally turning his life around. Family loyalty is a slippery thing. Every time Mason slipped, I caught him. And every time I told myself it would be the last. When I bought my condo on Wilder Avenue, Mason helped me move boxes. He carried my desk up the stairs, dropped it hard on the landing, and laughed. "Don't worry. You'll get a new one when you're making big money." He said it like my steady job was just a waiting room until something better fell in my lap. But Mason never waited, he schemed. Real estate opportunities, cryptocurrency investments, side hustles that always seemed to need seed money. I never asked too many questions. That was the deal, unspoken. I kept my eyes on my ledgers, and he kept his chaos out of my direct line of sight. But sitting in that cell, hearing about Summit Bank and Fenwick Street, I realized the line had already been crossed. Mason hadn't kept his chaos separate. He'd built it with my name. And the worst part? I'd trained everyone, my mom, my coworkers, even myself, to believe Mason's stories, not mine. He was the charmer, I was the accountant. If it came down to my word against his, I knew which way people would lean. That night, I wrote another entry in the spiral notebook. Family ledger, Mason. Library fines, age 12, me, bike replacement, age 13, me, bar ID fallout, age 16, me, credit card mix-up, age 25, me, condo move help, him, laughter. Every line added up to the same total, Mason took, and I covered. Now he'd taken my name. And if I didn't prove otherwise, I'd be the one to cover that too, in prison. The first thing I did after arraignment was borrow my mom's old Dell laptop. Slow as a dial-up ghost, but it was all I had left. I set it on my kitchen table, opened the spiral notebook, and started with the only lead that mattered, Summit Bank, account ending -1832. I couldn't log in, it wasn't really mine, but I had the photocopied statement Haynes had shown me. I copied every detail, routing number, last 4 digits, dates of the 4 $7,480 wire deposits. The numbers weren't random. 4 deposits, spaced 3 days apart. Just under $30,000 total. Enough to buy a car in cash without tripping federal reports. I called Summit's fraud hotline, gave them the case number for my arrest paperwork, and told them I'd never opened that account. The rep said, "We can't give you details over the phone, sir, but your attorney can request discovery. Off the record, though, the driver's license scan on file should settle it." That stopped me cold. There's a scan? Yes. Standard procedure for opening accounts. Which meant whoever opened it had either forged a license or, worse, had access to my real ID long enough to scan it. My brother had borrowed my wallet more times than I could count. That memory was no longer harmless. I flipped the page in the notebook and started a new log. Summit account -1832. 4 deposits, $7,480 each. Open with DL scan. Must verify loops in R, my signature. Likely used for layering, placement, greater than integration. Next was the Balin Credit Union line of credit. The paperwork listed my employer, my salary, even the internal title my HR file used, accounts receivable specialist too. That title wasn't public anywhere. But Mason had asked about it once, last Thanksgiving. "What's your official title again? Gotta make your LinkedIn sound fancy, bro." I'd laughed, told him the exact wording. Now it stared back at me in black and white. The dealership record came last, a 2018 graphite gray sedan registered to 1428 Fenwick Street. I pulled up the county assessor's database, typed the address. Property owned by Fenwick Holdings LLC. No photos, no occupancy data, just a shell on paper. The LLC had been formed 6 months ago. Registered agent? A law office downtown. The pattern was textbook. Placement through structured wires. Layering with LLC shells. Integration via car purchase. All of it tied to me. Smoke screens, built with my name as the anchor. I called Ms. Trenholm, my public defender. "You need to subpoena Summit for the account opening docs and the dealership for the cashier's checks," I told her. "You're speaking like an investigator," she said, almost impressed. "I am," I said. "I work in accounts, I know how these flows look when they're clean. This isn't clean." She promised to file. That night, I sat at the table under a single bulb, flipping through years of memories with Mason. Him asking to borrow my ID. Him laughing about networking with a dealer friend. Him bragging about investment accounts that nobody else had ever seen. The smoke screens had always been there. I just never looked hard enough. But now the smoke had my fingerprints all over it. And unless I cleared it, I was the one who'd choke. The first piece of hard proof didn't come from banks or subpoenas. It came from my mother's kitchen. Sunday dinner was mandatory in her eyes, even when I was under indictment. She set the table with her floral plates, ladled stew into bowls, and tried to make small talk as if nothing had changed. Mason sat across from me, sleeves rolled up, grinning like always. "Man, you look tired, Reed," he said between bites. "Guess County Holding isn't exactly the Hilton, huh?" I stared at him. "You'd know more about the Hilton than I would." He laughed, too loud, and Mom scolded him for being insensitive. But he didn't stop smiling. He was enjoying himself. After dinner, while Mom fussed in the kitchen, Mason leaned close. "You're not built for this kind of heat, little brother. Just ride it out. Say nothing. Things have a way of resolving." Resolve for who? That was the question echoing in my head when I drove home. The answer came 2 days later, when Ms. Trenholm handed me a slim envelope from Discovery. Inside was the Summit Bank account application. Printed, scanned, time-stamped. The signature at the bottom was supposed to be mine. But it wasn't. I could see it instantly, the R hooked once, not twice. The loop on the Y in Mallory dropped straight instead of curling left. Small details, invisible to most. But not to me. And then the kicker, the IP address logged at the time of account creation. 73.191.44.216. Not mine. I typed it into an online lookup. Location, Easton. ISP, Baynet Broadband. The same provider Mason used at his apartment. I knew because I'd helped him set up his router last year. The sticky note with the password was still stuck to his fridge. I felt my stomach drop. This wasn't suspicion anymore. This was traceable. A line from the account and my name straight back to his internet connection. I called Trenholm. "Get a forensic subpoena for Baynet. Match that IP to an account holder." "You sound very certain," she said. "I am," I told her. "I know whose apartment that address belongs to." That night, I opened my spiral notebook and wrote across the top of a clean page. Betrayal log, Mason. Use Summit account in my name. Forged signature, loop errors. IP trace, his provider, his apartment. Confirm with Baynet records. I sat back, pen tapping against the paper. For years, I'd covered his mistakes. But this wasn't a parking ticket or a bar tab. This was my life, my freedom, my name. And Mason hadn't just borrowed it. He'd weaponized it. The first betrayal was no longer a memory of some childish mistake. It was right here, logged in black ink, undeniable. And it was only the beginning. I treated it like an audit. Not just because that's what I knew, but because numbers don't lie when you put them in order. I started with the Summit account statement. Each $7,480 transfer came from a different originating account. I jotted the dates and times into the spiral notebook, then cross-referenced them against my own work calendar. On March 3rd, when one of the transfers hit at 11:14 a.m., I was logged into Garner and Latch's VPN, reconciling invoices. I had the session log from IT to prove it. March 6th, 2:27 p.m. I was in a Zoom meeting, recorded, timestamped. Every transfer had an alibi attached. Next, the dealership records. The car purchase used 2 cashier's checks drawn on the Summit account. Both were signed in wet ink. The Mallory signature looked wrong again, flat strokes, no hesitation, as if copied from memory. The bank's file included photocopies. I traced the loops with my pen and circled the errors. I emailed Trenholm, "We need handwriting analysis. Compare my employment docs with these signatures. They won't match." She replied within the hour, "Already in motion. Forensics expert retained." Then came Fennec Holdings LLC. A quick search of the Secretary of State's corporate filing showed it was incorporated by a paralegal at McCready Law, a firm Mason had bragged about once when he claimed he was networking downtown. The registered agent's name matched the one he'd dropped casually at dinner last Christmas. You wouldn't believe the deals you can set up if you know the right people. It wasn't proof yet, but it was proximity, too close to ignore. I built a flowchart in my notebook. Placement, wires into Summit, -1,832. Layering, transfer to Fennec Holdings LLC. Integration, vehicle purchase, 2018 sedan, graphite gray. And in the margins, IP trace Mason's apartment. Still, circumstantial wasn't enough. I needed digital proof. So I reached out to someone I hadn't spoken to in years, Colin Mercer, a college friend turned cybersecurity analyst. I called him late, explained in broad strokes, "I need to verify who logged into an account. I have an IP. I think it traces back to someone close to me." He was quiet for a long time. Then, You're asking me to risk my job. I'm asking you to check metadata. Nothing beyond public lookup. Just tell me if I'm crazy. An hour later, Colin texted, not crazy. That IP you gave me? Definitely resolves to Baynet Broadband, Residential, Easton zip 44105. I can't see the subscriber name, but if you get a subpoena, it'll nail it down. I stared at the message until the screen dimmed. It was the closest thing to confirmation I'd had yet. I logged it in the notebook. Metadata, Colin, IP 73.191.44.216 Baynet, Easton, 44105. Subpoena equals key. By midnight, my folder had grown too thick for one notebook. I started a binder, tabs labeled Summit, Balin CU, Fennec, Dealership, Metadata. Each entry neat, dated, cross-referenced. I wasn't just defending myself anymore. I was building a case. A prosecutor's case, but pointed at Mason. And as the binder grew, so did the realization. When I finally put this in front of him, he wouldn't see it as justice. He'd see it as betrayal. Which meant I had to be ready. Not just with facts, but with a trap he couldn't wriggle out of. 2 weeks after my arraignment, the county judge ruled I was a flight risk. The prosecutor leaned on the wires, nearly 30 grand moved through an account in my name, a car purchased in cash equivalents, a pattern of concealment. They painted me like a man with offshore dreams. So, bail revoked. The holding facility wasn't violent, just loud. Fluorescent lights humming, doors clanging, the air thick with sweat and disinfectant. My bunkmate was a guy named Fletcher, in for check kiting. He called me numbers boy and asked if I could help him balance his commissary. I kept my head down. I wrote in my spiral notebook whenever I could. The guards didn't care, pen and paper were safer than idle hands. Day 3, public defender visited. Baynet subpoena pending. Handwriting expert says signatures inconsistent with mine. Good. Day 7, missed work deadlines piling up. HR called mom asking where I was. She told them family emergency. Mason visited on day 9. He walked in with that same careless swagger, wearing a jacket that probably cost more than my month's rent. Sat across from me behind the glass, picked up the phone like we were catching up over drinks. Damn, little brother. You look rough. You set me up, I said. Flat. No greeting. He laughed, leaned back. Paranoid much? If I was running scams, do you think I'd be dumb enough to drag your name into it? I held his gaze. The IP address. The fake signature. The LLC. It's all pointing at you. His grin faltered for half a second, just enough to confirm what I already knew. Then it snapped back. Careful, Reed. You start throwing accusations like that, mom's going to hear about it. And you know who she believes. He wasn't wrong. Mom had spent 30 years cleaning up after Mason's messes, convinced each time it would be the last. If I told her he was the reason I was behind glass, she'd call it jealousy. Or stress. Or some paranoid fantasy. I logged the visit afterward. Day 9, Mason visit. Denied but smirked. Veiled threat Mom. Body language equals slip. Nights were the hardest. I'd lie awake, listening to Fletcher snore, the ceiling buzzing with electricity, and wonder if Mason was sleeping soundly in his apartment, driving that gray sedan with my name on the registration. By day 12, I got a manila envelope from Trenholm. Inside, Baynet's compliance response. Subscriber for IP 73.191.44.216 was Mason D. Mallory, 1428 Fennec Street. It was the missing puzzle piece. Proof the Summit account had been created on his connection, from his apartment. I sat on the steel bench, reading it over and over until the paper creased at the folds. Relief mixed with something heavier, anger, but cold, calculated, because now I had more than suspicion. I had evidence admissible in court. And if Mason wanted to play innocent, I was ready to play patient. By the time I hit my third week inside, the prosecution's stack was thick. Discovery landed on Trenholm's desk in glossy binders, wire confirmations, cashier's checks, dealership invoices, and photos of me in an orange jumpsuit clipped to the cover like proof the system was working. They had a story. I was an accounts receivable specialist who got greedy. I knew how to hide money, how to structure deposits, how to build shells. They painted me as the insider who'd finally crossed the line. And in a courtroom, story often outweighs truth. Trenholm met me in the interview room, binder in hand. They're pushing hard for a plea. 3 years if you admit guilt. I laughed, bitter. I didn't do this. She tapped the binder. Doesn't matter. Their case is clean on paper. What matters is if we can introduce doubt. That's where Mason comes in. The name hung heavy between us. I laid out the evidence I'd built, the IP address subpoena, the handwriting analysis, the Fennec LLC filings. She nodded, flipping through her notes. It's a start. But juries don't love circumstantial. We need him on record. Something undeniable. Something in his own words. That night, back in the cell, I stared at the ceiling until the buzz of the lights blurred into silence. Mason wasn't just my brother anymore, he was a hostile witness I had to bait into perjuring himself. The pressure kept climbing. HR sent a letter, I was suspended without pay pending the outcome. Mom visited, eyes red, voice shaking. Why are you dragging Mason into this? He says you're confused, read. Stressed. I wanted to shove the subpoena in her hands, make her read his name on that Baynet account. But I knew it wouldn't matter, not yet. Mason had a way of bending reality until people wanted to believe him. By day 23, I'd mapped out a plan. The only way to cut through his smoke screens was to make him generate proof himself, something time-stamped, recorded, verifiable. The trap had to be financial. That was his weakness and his addiction. If I dangled the right bait, Mason wouldn't be able to resist. He'd walk right into my ledger. I logged it in the spiral notebook. Pressure strategy. 1. Bait equals easy money. 2. Channel equals controlled account, monitored. 3. Capture equals metadata plus audio. 4. Verify equals independent witness. The prosecutor thought I was the one cooking books. But I was about to prove Mason had been writing my name into his ledgers all along. And this time, I was done covering for him. The plan needed bait Mason couldn't ignore, and a way to capture every move he made. When I finally made bail on a technicality, the handwriting expert's report gave Trenholm leverage to argue I wasn't a flight risk. I went home to an apartment stripped bare of electronics. My laptop, my phone, even my flash drives were still locked in evidence storage. But I had something better, Colin, the cybersecurity analyst who owed me a favor. We met at a diner off Route 12, both of us hunched over coffee mugs. I slid my notebook across. I need a controlled account. Something he can touch that I can watch. Colin frowned. You're talking about a honeypot. You realize that's basically a sting operation? I realize, I said. But Mason won't resist if it looks easy. By the next week, Colin had set up a checking account under my name with monitoring baked in, every login, every transaction, logged to a secure server. It wasn't fake money, I put in $500 from what little savings I had left. Just enough to make it real. The bait was simple, I let it slip to Mason, during a carefully scripted phone call, that I'd opened a clean account to keep cash off the radar while the case played out. I spoke fast, nervous, like I was scared but sloppy. I just needed something the court doesn't know about, you know? Emergency stash. He chuckled, voice warm, exactly as I expected. You shouldn't have told me that, little brother. Temptation's dangerous. I let the silence hang, then muttered, don't touch it, Mason. I mean it. That was the hook. Telling him not to. 3 days later, Colin called. You were right. Someone just logged in from Easton. Same Baynet connection. Same apartment. Tried to initiate a transfer, $480, to a Venmo account under the name M. D. M. Guess who? I closed my eyes, felt the tension knot in my chest. We have logs? Down to the second, Colin said. IP, geolocation, device fingerprint. All of it. But I needed more. Digital evidence was strong, but Mason was slippery. He'd claimed someone spoofed him, hacked his Wi-Fi, borrowed his device. So I set the second layer of the trap, audio. The next time he called, I steered the conversation back. I saw someone access that account, I said casually. Not you, right? He laughed. Relax. I only skimmed a little. You'll get it back. I repeated his words slowly, like I hadn't heard. You only skimmed a little. Yeah, he said, unbothered. Like old times, huh? You always cover. The recorder app on Colin's secure line caught every word. Timestamped. Clear. No ambiguity. I logged it in the binder under a new tab, confession. The net had closed, Mason had put himself inside it, his voice and his fingerprints all over the line. And for the first time in weeks, I felt the pressure ease, just a little. Because soon, it wouldn't be me sitting in the defendant's chair. It would be him. The first rule of evidence, one piece can be explained away. 2 pieces can be argued. But 3? With timestamps and corroboration? That's a noose. I had 3. 1. The IP logs, Mason's Baynet connection, traced directly to his apartment. 2. The metadata, his device fingerprint matching prior activity on the Summit account. 3. The recording, his own voice, admitting he skimmed a little and that I always covered. Trenholm's eyes narrowed as she flipped through the binder. This isn't circumstantial anymore. It's a pattern of conduct and a confession. You've got him cold. But prosecutors don't just drop charges because you say, look, my brother admitted it. They need admissibility, chain of custody, independent verification. So we brought in Colin. He swore an affidavit detailing the honeypot account, the logs, the monitoring system. His credentials as a cybersecurity analyst gave weight. The recording was backed by call metadata, date, time, originating number. When Trenholm presented it in pretrial, the assistant DA frowned like he'd bitten into something sour. This is highly irregular, he muttered. Fraud usually is, Trenholm shot back. They tabled the charges against me for review. For the first time since the night on my porch, I wasn't automatically guilty. The final push came a week later, when the police executed a search warrant at Mason's apartment. I wasn't there, but the inventory made its way to my binder. Apple MacBook containing logins to Summit, -1832, and Balin CU. USB drive with PDFs of forged driver's licenses, including mine. Title documents for the 2018 Graphite Gray sedan. Handwritten notes with dollar figures, arrows, and one phrase circled twice, read cover equals safety net. That last line hit harder than the rest. It was his handwriting, his words, proof that for Mason, I wasn't a brother. I was a tool. A shield. In the end, I didn't have to confront him face to face. The evidence did the talking. Mason was indicted on fraud, identity theft, and wire charges. The gray sedan was seized. The LLC was dissolved. When the judge formally dismissed my case, the gavel's crack sounded less like mercy and more like balance restored. But the sound I remember most isn't the gavel. It's Mason's voice on that recording, casual, smug, thinking he'd pulled one over on me again. Yeah. I only skimmed a little. You always cover. That was his confession. And his undoing. The courthouse was packed the day Mason was arraigned. Reporters filled the benches, notebooks out, cameras waiting in the hallway. Fraud cases don't usually draw a crowd, but the DA's office had leaked just enough to make it salacious. Local man builds shell empire using brother's identity. I sat behind the prosecution's table, not as a defendant this time, but as a witness. My wrists were free. My nameplate no longer read State v. Mallory, read. Now it read State v. Mallory, Mason. When the evidence played, it was clinical. First the IP logs, Baynet broadband, 1428 Fennec, subscriber name, Mason D. Mallory. The jury watched a technician walk through the trace, every step verified. Then the handwriting expert showed blown up side by sides, my genuine signature against Mason's forged one. He pointed to the single loop R, the misaligned Y. Finally, the recording. The courtroom speakers crackled with Mason's voice, clear and smug. Relax. I only skimmed a little. You'll get it back. Like old times, huh? You always cover. The sound hit the room like a blade through fabric. No wriggling, no plausible deniability. It was him. I glanced at Mom in the gallery. She had her hand over her mouth, tears brimming. She looked at Mason like she didn't recognize him. Maybe for the first time, she didn't. When court recessed, reporters swarmed the hallway. Questions flew at me. Reed, how does it feel to see your brother indicted? Do you forgive him? I didn't answer. I just held up the spiral notebook I'd carried since that first night and said, everything's in here. I just kept the ledger. The story spread fast. Local news ran with it. Online forums dissected the case filings. At Garner and Latch, HR reinstated me quietly, embarrassed. Coworkers whispered but didn't ask questions. And friends who doubted me at first sent texts of apology. I didn't know. I'm sorry I believed him. The public square where Mason had once been golden, charming, untouchable, was now the stage of his unmasking. His empire of lies, his shells, his fake signatures, all stripped bare under fluorescent lights and time-stamped exhibits. And me? I wasn't celebrated. I wasn't cheered. But I was cleared. Which, after weeks behind bars in someone else's story, felt like the loudest vindication possible. The verdict came fast. Guilty on all counts, fraud, identity theft, wire charges. Mason didn't flinch when the foreman read it. He just sat there in his suit, jaw tight, eyes scanning the jury like he was memorizing names. At sentencing, the judge called it a calculated betrayal of family trust and handed him 8 years. No theatrics, no speeches, just a number and a gavel strike that carried more weight than any words could. Mom sobbed quietly in the back. She never looked at me. I don't know if she blamed me for bringing it all to light or herself for never seeing it. Maybe both. Afterward, I went home to my apartment on Wilder Avenue. The box of seized electronics had finally been returned. I set my laptop back on the desk, opened the spiral notebook, and drew one last line across the page. Ledger closed. The charges against me were dismissed. My job was intact, though trust at the office would take time to rebuild. Neighbors who'd seen me cuffed on the porch now nodded cautiously when I passed, as if waiting to see whether I really belonged among them again. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt emptied out, like the weeks inside had scraped something permanent from me. But I also felt clean. My name was mine again. Mason would serve his sentence. Maybe he'd learned something inside, maybe not. That wasn't my burden anymore. I had spent a lifetime covering for him, library fines, credit cards, forged signatures, entire bank accounts. Now the ledger balanced. The cost was blood deep, but it was honest. A week after sentencing, I drove past 1428 Fenwick Street. The blinds were drawn, the mailbox stuffed with junk flyers, the graphite gray sedan long gone to impound. The place looked hollow, like a stage set after the actors had left. I parked for a moment, engine running, and opened my spiral notebook one last time. The pages were worn, smudged with fingerprints from holding cells and court benches. Every log, every timestamp, every dollar traced. Proof that I hadn't imagined it, that the betrayal had been real, written line by line. I tore out the last page, ledger closed, folded it once, and slid it into the glove box. The rest of the notebook I left on the passenger seat. Evidence of what it had cost me to reclaim my name. When the light changed, I pulled away, leaving Fenwick Street in the rearview. And I realized the cleanest cut wasn't the judge's gavel, or the prison sentence, or even the binder of evidence. It was the silence that comes when you finally stop covering for someone.